Hi everyone, this is Dr. Miller, and this is a keynote on chance to minimalism. And it's the keynote that I would have presented to you on Wednesday if I had been able, given the internet circumstance. I was not able, and I apologize for that. This is about a 15, 16-minute long keynote address, but in it there are plenty of examples that I'm going to ask you to go back to and click on so that you can watch them yourselves. Some of those links are really long and you don't have to look at the whole thing, and others are quite short. So I wanted to give you the option of sticking with it for as long or as short as worked for you. And I'll talk more about that at the end of this little presentation. Okay, so we're going to start this unit by thinking about and reviewing what came before. Just like we did when we moved from happenings into chance dances, we talked a little bit about what were the fundamental principles of happenings that might have allowed the aesthetic to evolve into chance dance. So here we're going to talk a little bit about chance dance and what those fundamental ideas were. Now you'll recall that Cunningham, Cage, and Rauschenberg, respectively a choreographer, a musician, and an artist, met at Black Mountain College in the 1950s, and each of them created individually while sharing those creations simultaneously. Right? So then this work, when performed as a movement, sound, setting event, was often labeled simultaneity. Right? And the dance portion of that movement was the movement that had been constructed in sections and then ordered by various methods of chance, and thus the name chance dance. Right? So the event itself was a simultaneous event, but the dance part of it was called a chance dance. Now we actually did this ourselves. We actually experienced getting 4 movements from a choreographer, then having them randomly ordered, then adding random stage directions and facings, and then picking up a second set of 4 movements using the words that the original choreographer used, but creating different movement to those words, and then going through the same random process so that we each created phrases for ourselves that were not, the order of which was not known until the last minute. Now, from this way of working, Cunningham made a claim that he was not interested in narrative and he was not interested in emotion, but he was interested in movement for movement's sake. I bring this up because you may recall when we were first talking at the beginning of the semester, we started asking ourselves about whether or not for it to be considered art, it needed to be telling a story, or it needed to be expressing a particular emotion, or did it need to be soliciting a particular understanding of a narrative or a particular emotion from the audience. Cunningham's going to say no to all of that. It didn't need to do any of those things. Just movement for movement's sake was interesting enough. And from there, he opened the door for each audience member to come with an open mind and see what they saw and kind of make a claim about that. This is what I'm noticing when I see this movement. That was sufficient for him. Now, the advantages of working like this for the creator, for the choreographer, is that manipulating movement that way meant even the choreographer was surprised at what resulted. And you may have witnessed yourself, I certainly did experience when we were in the Martin Theater, seeing the work on the stage for the first time and having the ooh and ah expression happen because I was so surprised at how gorgeous, how beautiful it was to see those works kind of evolve and take shape right before my eyes, even though that hadn't been practiced, right? I hope you had that experience. I really certainly did. Genuinely, I did. For the dancer, the advantage to this was that anyone could participate. There was a particular skill in not knowing what you were doing until the moment you were doing it. Different from improvisation, where you were free to do anything you wanted. In this case, the I Ching, or the rolling of the dice, or the throwing of the pieces of paper in the air and then collecting them, actually determined an order, but you didn't know that order ahead of time. You might get it the day before, you might get it an hour before, you might get it in the wings when you were waiting to perform. And so the movement had to be simple enough that anyone could participate. Anybody who was committed to that process would be able to participate. And for the audience, the very idea that there's no right or wrong to what you're watching, that there's no clear right answer that you're supposed to be getting from watching a dance, meant that the audience member couldn't walk away and say, well, I didn't get it. I'm not interested in that because I didn't get it. To say that, in Cunningham's mind, would have been to say, you're not interested in what's happening to you, yourself, from your own past experiences, right? So the idea is that you should be able to watch human beings moving, and it will elicit some sort of response in you. That response is unique to you, and you should be interested in what it is you're experiencing, right? So that was the advantage for the audience. Obviously, there are disadvantages as well to that way of working. One of them is that the choreographer has to yield control of the results, and that means that sometimes the works fail. They fail to be interesting to the choreographer. The choreographer is like, she's standing right in front of him, or they're too close, or I can't see what just happened, or it looks like they're supposed to be together, but they're not. Those kinds of past experiences from the choreographer also get brought into seeing what's happening and not appreciating it. For the dancer, how hard is it to remember what you're supposed to be doing if you only learn about it at the last minute before you go in front of an audience, a formal audience, especially people who've bought tickets to see it, right? And some of you may have experienced even getting it on Monday and having to have it really pretty close to down pat by Wednesday was hard, right? There just wasn't enough time in your scheduled lives to rehearse it enough. Yeah. But I think this experience for the dancer probably was experienced more by you on Monday when I said, here's the order, good luck, go up there and do your best, right? That's what it would have felt like to the dancers. And for the audience, maybe I'm too tired to unravel all of that right at this moment. Maybe I just want to be entertained. I might not find the dance to be entertaining. Or a second idea related to this is maybe I think dance is supposed to be entertaining and I'm not interested in it because I don't want to learn something about myself. I want to be entertained. And that didn't always happen. Okay, so I just have a little aside that I want to throw in here. This concept of movement for movement's sake is something that I'd like to be a takeaway from this class, that you understand that watching human movement might just be for the sake of watching human movement rather than predicting what an audience will respond when they see it, right? But I want you to know that Cunningham was not the first to make movement for movement's sake. George Balanchine, the artistic director, in fact, the founder and artistic director of the New York City Ballet, was also interested in this concept. He didn't name it that, but that's what he was interested in. Balanchine also thought that each audience member should come with an open mind and should see what they saw and begin to put meaning on it from themselves. He was interested in abstract ballet, okay? And ballet, a ballet that he started creating in the 30s when he first started the New York City Ballet, had that same sense. And so on this slide, and you can go back and get it, this slide has Serenade, which was a work that Balanchine did that's absolutely gorgeous. And he used whatever number of dancers showed up in the studio that day. It happened to be 17. That's an unusual number for a ballet choreographer to work with because it's a prime number. There's no way to divide it into, 4 sets of 4 or 5 sets of 4 or 4 sets of 5 or, even in threes. There's no way to subdivide this easily. But he decided that was fine with him, and he would work with whatever turned out, and he would work simply with movement. And when you watch this piece, this version is about 30 minutes long. It's in 4 sections, and you're free to watch as much or as little of it as you want. But I think you should see that not just modern dance was doing this movement for movement's sake. Ballet was doing that also. What's the result of all that chance dance? If movement is what we're witnessing, then the choreographers started to want more and more and more sophisticated movers to work with, right? They wanted people who could do almost anything. They wanted people who could do movement that was not already trained into the human body. And so choreographers started working with trained movement and working in a way that I have named with a kind of an elitism, right? So that ballet, you know what ballet vocabulary looks like and how elite that is. Like, not just anyone can stand up and do what they're doing in Serenade, right? The same is also true of modern dance, although it's not understood as well. You really have to have some training to do modern dance well. And what that means is you have to understand how the human body is working. And the choreographers wanted more and more and more trained dancers in order to do movement that was less and less usual, less and less everyday, less and less normal. So, okay. So now we move into the next kind of movement that happened in aesthetic dance, and that's minimalist dance. So there were people that were creating their own movement vocabularies, and though they were keeping them small, there was a big break into factions, I'd say, across the dance world where people started being trained as a certain kind of dancer and really able to cope with that movement vocabulary. So Martha Graham had a particular vocabulary, Doris Humphrey had a vocabulary, Jose Limon had a vocabulary, Merce Cunningham had a vocabulary, Paul Taylor had a vocabulary, right? Alvin Ailey had a vocabulary, Lester Horton had a vocabulary. This is a picture of Trisha Brown. She has a particular way of moving, and she was hiring dancers who were willing to train extensively in the way she was moving so that she could select from among that movement to create her dances pretty easily. As choreographers started working that way, they began to understand that they could work with less and less complicated movement. It was specific movement, but less and less complications in the phrases, and instead work more and more deeply and repeat that work over and over and over again. So what became fascinating was the intricacy of the movement rather than the volume of different vocabulary words. The dancers choreographers became interested in how that movement changed, kind of by accident. I put it in quotes because it's not by design, and that's why I'm calling it by accident. It wasn't on purpose that it changed, but they did know that the condition was that it would change, right? So repetition was the key, and incremental changes is what they were looking at. And I'm going to ask you to pull away for a second and just practice doing this maybe with words. So you might want to say, the rabbit was hopping, the rabbit was hopping, rabbit was hopping, rabbit was hopping, rabbit was hopping, and keep saying the phrase that you've selected over and over and over again, and listen to the incremental changes that happen in the way you pronounce the words, the way they sound to you, whether they sound rhythmically the same over and over again, or does that begin to shift and change over some time? All of those things are the things we were looking at in the movement as well. And that's what the minimalist dance work was about. Repetition as the key, and incremental changes became more and more interesting. And consequently, the vocabulary for the entire dance might be quite small. Let's take a look. The advantages were the range of vocabulary. It might have been called purposefully limited, right? I want to stick to 3 or 4 basic movements, and I might do them in slightly different ways, but I'm not going to predict ahead of time what those slightly different ways are going to be. So, for instance, maybe try jumping with 2 feet, jumping. You're in your room at home, you're in your dorm room while you're listening to this, and you're jumping and just jumping on 2 feet and jumping, 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 jumping. And pretty soon you get so worn out that you do something else. Maybe you reach for a table and put one hand on the table to help you jump more steadily. Or maybe you say, I'm so tired, I'm going to shift to just jumping on my right leg and then just jumping on my left leg to give each leg a little bit of a rest before I go back to jumping on both legs. This is the kind of organic change that's born out of repetition. This is what minimalism is about. Now, the disadvantages is the audience really had to come with some understanding to watch that carefully. They really had to commit to sitting there and watching those incremental changes over time. And some people have an eye for that and some people don't. Some people have a patience for that and some people don't, right? So the audiences became elite in a certain kind of way. Okay, let me wrap this up by saying what we're going to do, how to engage in a minimalist movement. We're going to look at several videos of the minimalist movement. I'm going to put them on the screen here in the next 2 slides. And you're going to do these 4 things. You're going to make a determination of what they are focusing on by naming that movement. You'll recall that we have some background in this when Susan Alexander said swing, stepping, level change, minimal to immobile. That's what I'm talking about. You're going to make some determinations of what the dancer is focusing on, right? And then we'll enhance the movement choices by using carefully chosen sound environments, right? Listen to the sound that's behind each one of these dances and allow that sound to be equally important. Again, relative to simultaneity, relative to Cage and Cunningham, right? The sound is equally important and it's skewing the way you perceive what it is you're viewing, what it is you're witnessing. Number 3, you're going to give unprecedented meaning by placing the movement in predetermined spatial environments. We call that site-specific work. What I mean is, when something is on a proscenium stage, the idea that it's on a stage is supposed to disappear, and what comes through is simply a kind of formality about it. But we are actually going to choose the spatial environment. I have chosen one and reserved it, which is the platform tennis courts at Denison. We're going to look for some others that we decide upon together as a class. But I want you to know that we need to look for a space in which we can do a sort of movement study and film that movement study and imagine what that is. Now, in this particular exercise, the people who are remote are simply not at a disadvantage, but you may need to make very specific choices about, okay, all of us are going to do this in a dining room. All of us are going to do this in a living room. All of us are going to do this in a bedroom. All of us are going to do this in a hallway. Right? So we're going to make deliberate choices about spatial environments. And then 4th, you're going to look carefully at the camera angles in order to optimize the repetition. What does it mean to repeat something over many minutes of time? And would it help if the camera was wide angle and then came closer and then came closer and then came closer still? Or perhaps the opposite, that it started really tight and then moved back and back and back so that you could see what was happening. right? So we're going to look carefully at those camera angles. Okay, the next two slides. Here are some examples of minimalist movement. The David Gordon and Valdez Setterfield chair piece, choreographed by David Gordon, was created in 1974, but recorded here in 1978. So it's a really, really, really old reel-to-reel videotape, and it's about a 45, I don't remember exactly how minutes long, about 45 minutes long. You'll see that it's on a stage space. It has two folding chairs, and what seems like it might be improvisatory, you'll see is not, because David and Valda are both doing the same movement at the same time often. So take a peek at that one. That's a really old one. The second one is Laura Dean. Laura Dean did a piece called Creative Force, and this version of it is danced by the Joffrey Ballet. They're in red costumes and they're spinning around the stage. Laura Dean was famous for spinning dances, and so there's a lot of spinning in her work, and that's the movement vocabulary that she was interested in. Then I gave you a YouTube of Trisha Brown doing Set Reset in 1983, and the link that I gave you has a little bit of history talking about Trisha Brown and her work, and I thought just once it might be nice for you to hear somebody else talk about one of these modern dancers and how she did this work and why she did the work this way. So instead of just picking the dance piece itself, I went with a video that had a little bit of history on it. And then the final one is Anna Teresa de Keersmacher, and it's de Keersmacher's work, Clapping Dance or Violin Phase, that is so interesting to me. And it's in this piece that she seems to be perhaps on sand, perhaps on snow, but I think it's sand. We could make a decision about, she's dancing around in a circle, a predetermined circle. It's a large circle. I don't know what the circumference is, but I'd say the diameter is probably a good 10 feet. Right? And we could create leaves in the same way so that when she dances through it, the leaves get scattered. Right? So take a peek at that. And then the second slide has 4 examples of minimalist music, because remember, you have to do the movement and the music. So look at Lamont Young, who is really into drones and drone sound. This piece is from his Black album, and the piece is very long. It's about an hour long. And it's just a drone sound over and over and over again. But Terry Riley is the person that I'm going to go with as the one who did the first piece that was really made minimalism popular in music. And this piece is called In C. So what he did for this piece is created 53 patterns around the key of C, and then people were free to do any of those 53 patterns they wanted in any order that they wanted, repeating any of those 53 patterns as much as they wanted, or not doing any of those patterns. So every time In C is performed, it sounds completely different, which is why I wrote, this is Terry Riley doing one version of In C. The third example is Steve Reich doing clapping music, and I gave you this because you'll get to see the score of it while he's doing it. This YouTube video actually makes the score move across the screen, and this is the same music that Anna Teresa de Keersmacher used in one of the pieces I gave you in the previous slide. So I wanted you to see what the score looked like. And then the last piece is a Philip Glass piece. This one's called Glassworks. Philip Glass might be the most famous of these people to people who are, for audience members who live outside of the world of music. And Philip Glass's work is quite melodic, frankly, quite sophisticated and melodic. And there's so much Philip Glass available to you that I'm thinking that might be one that you would find most easily. So again, let me remind you that I'm asking you to look at the minimalist movement videos and listen to the minimalist music videos. So you've got the dance and the music. You've got 8 examples there to look at. I know some are longer, some are shorter. You can invest a lot or a small amount of time. I don't really want to be the police of how much time and effort you put in, but hold on to these slides so that you can go look at these over and over again over the course of creating your own work. And we, on Monday, I think it's the 18th, I'm not positive, we will divide into teams of 4 and start making these minimalist dances with sound that selects and optimizes a particular location. Okay? Thanks everyone for listening, and I will see you on Monday.